fashionista Phil yet another color on his sweatshirt. It kind of matches
Without a
chair
shopping bag full of them.
And Peter's as well, so.
There you go. All right, we are on.
About it.
Our meeting is
They didn't get the
beginning.
memo.
Well, the memo is that this is a planning board meeting. This is Goffstown. Tonight is Thursday. Today is January 9th. And the purpose of tonight's meeting is to hold public hearings on zoning amendments. That we have three proposed by the planning board and one proposed by petition. Before we get to that, and I do have minutes that the board has not yet addressed of December 12th and December 19th. They were provided to board members in their packet. Is the board prepared to make a motion on those minutes?
I move we approve the 7th, November 7th. No, wait a minute.
December 12th and 19th are the two that we need to do.
One. Yeah. Should we do them separately? And the 12th?
Yes, please, because I wasn't here for one of them.
Okay, and is there a second to the 12th?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded for the minutes of the 12th. Is there any further discussion or amendments to those minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Abstaining.
Abstaining.
Kimberly's abstaining, and Peter's abstaining, and Karen, regular member, is not present tonight. So David, why don't you be a voting member?
I was aye.
Huh?
Aye.
Okay. And minutes, the minutes of the meeting of December 19th.
Make a very similar motion.
I'll make a similar second.
All right, so
Have it, Peter.
are there any further comments or discussion by board members? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, abstaining,
I abstain.
and Kimberly abstains. Thank you, everybody. All right, so this is a zoning amendment public hearing. These are proposed zoning amendments that would appear on the warrant to be voted on by town people in March. This is the second public hearing on these changes. The 2 public hearings are required by law. We will be voting on all proposed amendments at the conclusion of tonight's meeting. And these have been properly noticed in the Union Leader as required. We have previously had a public hearing on these, going through some details with our code enforcement officer, who is also present tonight. Given that we have already gone through the amendments in detail, I'm going to summarize them, and unless the board members feel it's necessary, I will not go through the amendments in detail. So in regards to this, we will be giving explanation of the proposed amendments, but full text copies are available on the town's website, at the planning department here at Town Hall, and in the town clerk's office here at Town Hall. And Town Hall is at 16 Main Street here in Goffstown. The hours of operation are 8 to 4, Monday through Friday, and ADA assistance is available if you'd like to come down and take a look at them. Again, the proposed amendments are on the town website in full. The first proposed amendment is to amend the Goffstown zoning ordinance, the glossary section, which is the definition section, and the proposal is to remove the current definition of recreational vehicle in its entirety and replace it with a definition of recreational vehicles shall mean a self-propelled or towed vehicle that is equipped to serve as temporary living quarters for recreational, camping, or travel purposes. Any comments on this definition change? Joanne, just if you can summarize what the hope of getting this new definition was?
Well, there are so many different types of vehicles that are used, and things have changed over the years since this was included in the zoning ordinance, that we thought it would best to be just general and generalize the definition to include anything that you can use for those purposes.
Right, and in fact, this actually shortens the definition, which previously include actually square footage measurements and reference to towing and trucks, so it does, as Joanne says, makes it more general. At this time, the purpose of this is a public hearing. I am opening the public hearing as to all of the zoning ordinances. And at this time, I'd like to see if anybody would like to make any comments on proposed zoning amendment 1. I'm not seeing any comments, but if anyone wants to make any comments on this or other proposed amendments during this hearing, we will of course take them. With the board's permission, I'm going to move on to zoning amendment number 2. This zoning amendment also deals with recreational vehicles, but this deals with section 7.7 of our zoning ordinance. This relates to parking and storage of recreational vehicles by removing our current provision and replacing it with, no recreational vehicle shall be parked or stored in a residential district except in a carport or enclosed vehicle or in the rear area. No such area shall be used for living, sleeping, or housekeeping purposes. And just to be clear, that's what the ordinance says now. And what we are proposing that it would read is that no recreational vehicle shall be parked or stored on a public way. Parking shall not create a safety hazard. Recreational vehicles shall not be used for sleeping and housekeeping purposes. So by doing this, we are essentially allowing parking of recreational vehicles anywhere on a lot. The previous definition required it to be, if not enclosed or covered, in the rear yard. And for some lots, that was problematic in regards to either access or actual storage. Is there anyone here who'd like to make a comment on this proposed zoning ordinance? I'm not seeing anybody, so with the board's permission, I'm going to move on to the proposed third amendment that would appear on the ballot should the board vote to recommend it. This amendment would be to amend section 13.2 of our zoning ordinance, and that relates to the flood hazard district, which this town has adopted, and we would replace portions of 13.2 and insert section of FEMA's updated model ordinance. This proposed zoning amendment number 3, if you go to our town website, actually is approximately 13, maybe 14 pages. And what are, at the recommendation of our code enforcement officer, we are updating the ordinance as to dates, as to what plans we are referring to, updating the plan as to definitions, and also dealing with the issue of accessory buildings on a site and what is required in order to build something that is not a residential structure on a lot that is in the flood zone. Do the board members think there's anything to be added to that explanation? Is there any member of the public here who'd like to comment on it? Nancy is here. I'm not seeing that anybody's here that needs anything answered, so I'm going to, David.
For the residents viewing, is the flood zones defined in a map on our website?
Yes,
Yeah, thank you.
it's in, on the GIS maps as an overlay.
Thank you. 'Cause
Thank you, David. That is Nancy Larson, our zoning code enforcement officer, and chances are if you live in the flood overlay district, you know it.
the residents most concerned about this would be, they should see where, if they're in such a
And you are
zone.
probably abutting the river or the lake, because most of you were going to be at a higher elevation. Nancy, did you want to add something?
Yes, may I speak to a couple of things in the document?
Okay, a couple. Because we've already gone over this, we've had no comments, and it's on the website.
So OEP was able to get back to me with their review of our document. There were only some updated changes to terms that we use in the document, new language that they replaced in our definitions. There's, for example, if we go to our, well, actually in the beginning of the document, we we repeatedly now refer to the 100-year floodplain, a more updated term, and it's a term that we have added, that the board has already considered in the new set of definitions, the definition for special flood hazard area.
Right.
So staff at OSI recommended that we just strike the old term of 100-year floodplain and just replace it with the term that we already have a new definition for in this document that you've had
All
before.
right, so that's not a substantive change
No,
to
there,
anything.
nothing, no substantive change. So you'll see that repeated throughout the document. There's one instance where they recommend, instead of using special flood hazard area, using base flood elevation. That's section 13252. And the difference is because it's just a matter of how the term is being used. You're looking at how a structure is being developed in the floodplain. So using base flood is the more pertinent term in that case.
And it's consistent with the change in the reference to
Yes.
the 100-year plan.
Yep, yes. So, in other places, page 6, there was a reference to a map that we don't use anymore. It's 13.2.11.1, FHBM. I'm not even sure what that stands for, but they recommended striking that. So there were a lot of changes like that they caught, just housekeeping changes, not substantive changes. That same sentence talks about determining the base flood elevation in certain zones. Right now it refers to Zone A and Zone AE. They recommended striking the term "a" and only because Zone A is addressed in the sentence below, so it's just really housekeeping changes. The only thing that I would say maybe lies on that cusp of potentially being substantive, and the board certainly will let me know what they think. If you go to page 4 of the zoning amendments, it has to do with recreational vehicles being parked or stored in the floodplain. It's 13.2.7. And we haven't touched that language so far, but you'll see the words in red in the strike-through text that was recommended in OEP's set of edits that came back to me recently. And the section after in Roman numeral 2, where it talks about "and ready for highway use," they recommend removing that those words and replacing it with the words you see in red to really better, it really is explaining what it means to be ready for highway use. It just doesn't use the terms, and it provides examples of how it can be made ready for highway use. So I think if the question ever came up, it would be simple for either me or the building official, who's the floodplain manager, to look at a RV and see if it falls under, if it's satisfied by any of these items, like it's on wheels or a jacking system, it's attached to the site only by a quick disconnect type utility and security devices, and there's no permanently attached addition. So it takes the subjectivity out in that sentence as far as highway use, in my opinion. But, of course, it's entirely up to the board. The next paragraph, Roman numeral 3, those sections that are stricken through are references to FEMA's document, so OSI thought it made more sense, instead of referencing a document that we don't all have ready access to reference those sections that are applicable in our floodplain ordinance. And then there was duplicate language that you see in 13.2.8.1 that strike-through text. It was brought to my attention that we already have that exact same statement in the paragraph below under 13.2.8.2. So there were, a lot of those things that they caught in their review, and so I went ahead and made those edits, but I wanted to highlight them so you were aware of them. And the two things that the board had questions about, and one was that term of any magnitude. So I spoke to the folks over at OSI and explained the board's trepidation with that terminology. So they said it's not an issue. If you want to just go back to the language that we already have, we can do that. So that's why A above it actually is what we have currently in the zoning ordinance. And the strike-through text in red is what we were recommending from the model ordinance, but we won't insert that. And then the board's other comment had to do with playhouses on page 8. And so under definition of accessory structure, so you'll see that that's been removed.
We deal with substantive issues.
All right, thank you, Nancy.
I have a very minor, style comment, and I'll leave it to Nancy to decide. Some places, when we use a defined term, we capitalize it in the text, and the changes on page 3 and 4, we did not. Special flood hazard area, which are defined, base flood elevation, and I'm not a fan of over capitalization, but sometimes it does tell you that it's a defined term if you use special caps.
I think it's, for someone who's administering the zoning ordinance, I find it very helpful working with an ordinance that capitalizes the first letter of each word that is defined, because then I know I can go to the glossary
So
and
it's
find
not a
definition.
substantive change, but like,
So I can do that.
Yeah, I don't think that's it.
But it's a good change.
Yeah, okay. All right. Are there any public comment on proposed zoning amendment number 3, which deals with section 13.2 flood hazard district by replacing portions and certain portions of the model ordinance and some other changes as proposed and noticed here tonight? I'm not seeing any. All right, I would prefer to address the changes in this as we go through to vote on them. So at this point, I'd like to move on to the petitioned amendment. So this will appear on this warrant in March for vote. And this, should the planning board proceed with the previous 3 amendments that we just talked about, this would be amendment number 4. This is the petition that was submitted, signed by registered voters of the town of Goffstown, and this would amend the zoning ordinance by changing the zoning of the property identified as tax map 38, lot 117, from residential 1, which we refer to as R1, to village commercial. The property address is 21 Elm Street, Goffstown, New Hampshire. And the petitioner has been notified of this public hearing and is here tonight to speak to it. So, Mr. Boschman, or someone, come on down.
Hi, for the record, my name is Maria Dolder. I represent the petitioner. And I believe that the board is very familiar with this request because Mr. Boschman has indicated to me that he's been before the board asking the board to actually push it forward, and then it was recommended to him that he come back and do it by petition instead. So I don't want to take up too much of your time if you don't want me to do a full presentation and you simply have questions of me, but I'm kind of happy to go either way.
Jim?
well, what's different, I guess, between recognizing your client's very persuasive argument last year? Is there anything different?
I think that he made the same arguments last year.
I think we need to have the argument. I mean, it's nice for us all to say that we've heard this before, but this is the public hearing on this proposal, and we may know what 21 Elm Street is, but that doesn't mean that everybody else does.
Sure,
So
and
if you could-
yeah, absolutely.
So
I'm
if you
happy
could
to
just
do
run
it.
through it.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Just if you have questions at any time, just stop me.
Okay,
But
thank
the
you.
yeah, no problem. The gist of this is that the parcel used to be approximately 3 acres in size.
All right, and where is this parcel located?
It's located at 21 Elm Street, which is on the corner of Maple Ave and Elm Street.
All right,
So,
So
Assuming
if somebody
people are
was
familiar with
driving
the-
by, this might be the white colonial on the corner as you turn into the elementary
yes,
school.
I was gonna say, it's right near the elementary school,
Okay.
so
On
that's
the left side.
probably, yes, that's probably the big thing that most people in town would know. That parcel was subdivided, and so now the front portion of it, which is the portion on Elm Street, the frontage on Elm Street, is now about half an acre, maybe 0.6 of an acre. This happens to be the only lot that's west of Maple Street and Reed Street that's not village. So I apologize, I didn't bring copies, we had a little miscommunication, but I think you guys have maps in front of you and plans which show, so this red is the village zoning. This is our lot, this is Maple, Elm, and Reed, and as you can see, it's like that, it's that last little corner that's just left out of the zoning. And so what they're asking is that we make that lot consistent with the other lots around it, and we change it from the R1 to village. That will give this lot more potential, and it will make it consistent with the area. It's consistent to what's next door and across the street. And it just kind of, it just cuts off that zone nicely. And we understand why it wasn't done in the past, because in the past, when it was a 3-acre lot, you would have created a split zone in that lot, which clearly would not have made sense. But now that it's been cut off and it's a smaller lot, it makes sense to join it in the district that it is at. And, I mean, that's the general gist of what we're looking for, and obviously, we're looking for the planning board to support this petition. And we're happy to answer any questions or walk through anything further that you might have, but it's pretty straightforward.
Jim.
Mary, can you put up your map again?
sure.
What, across the street, point to, so the other.
So these are all, so this is Maple, this is Reed,
Mhm.
and so these are all zoned village.
Got it, thank you.
You're welcome.
We had pretty colored maps.
Yeah, I know, and I thought somebody was bringing pretty colored maps.
All right, are there any questions from board members on this? Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this proposed zoning amendment to change the lot located at 21 Elm Street? This is map 38, lot 117, from residential to village commercial. I'm not seeing any, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to make a last call for public comment on the zoning amendments as proposed by the planning board and by a petitioner. I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to close the public hearing, and board members, it is time to make a decision on what to do. So, I think we either start with 1 or deal with the petitioned article number 4, because we actually have that petitioner here, and we address it and then move on to ours. So,
Go in numerical order, because otherwise I get confused.
all right, so zoning, Jim is proposing zoning amendment number 1, which is a change in the glossary definition for recreational vehicle.
I'm going to, what we're doing procedurally is we're putting it on the ballot. We're-
Right.
You're
We're making
recommending.
a- we're making
Well,
a-
actually, if it goes on, anything that comes from us is considered recommended, so we're going to vote.
Because it's not on the ballot otherwise.
Yeah,
That was
so-
this petitioned article.
that's right. So
Yeah.
on ours, we just put it on the ballot. So I'm gonna
So
move-
you're
do that.
moving to put it on the ballot. All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to put this on the ballot. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, it carries unanimously. All right, amendment number 2, which is the amendment which deals with changing the parking, which is currently restricted as to recreational vehicles, to being allowed on a lot, with continuing restrictions as to the fact they're not to be used for sleeping or housekeeping purposes. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion. Go forward with it.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on this? I'm gonna vote for this, but I have to say that I am gonna wanna know what issues come up in the next year. Because if you don't have adequate place to store stuff that you buy on your lot so that it's not out of the way, then you need to pay for storage for it. And I don't think it's gonna be a big issue, but I think there was a reason we had these recreational vehicles parked on the side and the back. If you're living in a $300,000 house neighborhood that has 2 acres, there is no reason that the recreational vehicles can't be parked off to the side. So, and I'm not saying that they won't continue to be, but I'm a little worried that we're trying to address an enforcement issue with a broad brush that isn't appropriate. So I'm gonna vote for it, but I'm gonna wanna know if this goes forward after town meeting, I'm gonna wanna know what issues, if anything, come up on it, because I do think the storage of things on property is an issue in a town that is essentially a bedroom community, that people pay a lot of money for houses, so they live in a neighborhood that is consistent with what they want, so anyways. Any further
Sure.
discussion on it?
The advantage of this is it's not a permanent structure, so we don't run into the grandfathering issues if we change our mind next year.
All right, seeing no further discussion, I'm gonna call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, abstaining, it carries. All right, the next amendment, number 3, is as to the changes in the flood hazard district. And I think the first thing we need to deal with are the changes that were presented to us by Nancy on page 4, as to whether or not those constitute substantive changes or whether or not those are consistent with what had been previously proposed. And I think that deals with 13.2.7, is my recollection. Nancy, is that right? That's really the only one, right? Okay. Phil?
Yeah, I guess I would like to hear why it's not a substantive change from the terminology of being ready for highway use when there are other items that are brought in that aren't even mentioned on the ready for highway use.
Well, I don't think, I think Nancy presented it as being more descriptive of what highway use is rather than adding new categories. So that is a point, it has new terms, and so that's a question for the board, whether making the definition more specific is a substantive change. Joanne?
I'm just wondering, why does it matter? Because this change was advertised, and this is the second hearing, but it was advertised with that change.
Thank you.
Well, I guess that answers my question. Of why I asked the question.
I think the larger question is this what you want to go forward with for the next few years?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure the definition makes it clear to me that it's a highway use ready vehicle, but zoning code enforcement officer is explaining to me that it is. I frankly like the fact that we're changing the reference to the sections to being within our own ordinance as compared to something else in paragraph 3, so, subparagraph 3, so I'm okay with that. So I think the only issue is the expansion of what highway use means. Are board members comfortable with it or not? I don't have anybody have any issues with it?
I don't.
All right, I think the other things that were talked about, as Joanne said, have been noticed We haven't received any comment on it. Tim?
So, are we putting ourselves in a position where if it's not fully licensed and it's not ready for highway use, then it's acceptable?
No, it's just for floodplain, it's just an insurance provision.
I'm just asking the question because we are being specific with registered and ready for highway use. Well, the opposite of that is, and if you don't address that, is that a loophole that someone could use against us to say, well, your zoning ordinance says fully licensed and ready for highway use? Well,
The words fully licensed
fully licensed.
remains.
but what if
Words.
it's not fully licensed then? Forget the highway use, because I see it's stricken.
Your point is?
If it's unlicensed. I bought a motor home and I brought it home and a wrecker towed it to my yard and backed it in. No license on it, so you've stated fully licensed. What's the difference between that and unlicensed? Does that provide a loophole for a resident to not comply with the section?
All recreational vehicles shall be fully licensed.
You're both saying the same thing. The point is
No.
that,
No, no.
yes,
not.
no, yes, they are. David's reading the statute and Tim's pointing out, but what if, reading the proposed ordinance and Tim's pointing out about, what about the vehicle that's parked on the lot that's not fully registered / licensed?
So does this ordinance say they have to license that vehicle?
No, it's a disjunctive, it says or, so it's one of those three.
One or the other.
One of those
of the three.
Right. It says shall either. Look at the
Okay.
first line of it. It doesn't say or after the first subparagraph, which is why you're getting sucked into.
I'm just asking the question because it seemed
Where?
apparent to me.
But Roman numeral 2 says be fully licensed. It's A or E shall either be on the site for fewer than 180 consecutive days, be fully licensed.
Or meet all
That's
standards. for-
During that 180 days,
Right.
it's more at risk should there be a flood.
No, but does it have to be licensed?
It could be taken off in 180 days unlicensed, I guess.
Right.
All right, just as long as somebody doesn't come up and say, well, it's not licensed, it's gotta be taken off. I mean, you could do it on a flatbed, you see these little trailers on flatbeds all the time, dump it on a lot, move on.
Take it away for 2 days and bring it back 2 days later.
Because the purpose of this is so that a vehicle, a recreational vehicle is apt to be pushed downstream and do damage to an abutting property.
Oh, I see.
And the public good is we should try to limit that risk to other residents. Because we're making the assumption that the owner would, in a time of risk, move it. And because the zoning is
That's fine.
helping them to find that.
Thank you. All right. Is there any further discussion on this proposed zoning amendment? Jim, you're looking in,
Oh, I was just looking, and it, the substantive change, it's gotta be on, it has to be posted in final form by the 5th Tuesday before the date when action is taken, so
we're fine.
So is the decision that the changes to 1327 are not substantive? Is that?
Well, they've been posted, and if we were to approve them and put them on the warrant, that we would be well within the time period required by the statute.
if we amended them tonight.
Right.
Then we might have some
Right.
issues.
Well,
I see.
My concern was, I didn't realize that.
That they had been
that's
noticed, yeah.
what had been sent out.
All right, so is there any further discussions on this proposed amendment number 3? All right, seeing none, is there a motion?
I move that we approve it for putting on the ballot.
Is there a second?
No second.
Been moved and seconded, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, abstaining, it carries. All right, proposed amendment number 4, this is the petition warrant article for map 38, lot 117, to change it from R1 to village commercial. Is there any discussion on that? Peter?
The way the map looks and the way the lot looks, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't do it.
Kimberly?
I think one of the reasons why we chose not to do this, and I thought it was a good point, and I believe it was Jim that brought it up, is they could still put a business there and come in to zoning and get a waiver. And in that situation, they have to come before a public hearing, the abutters get notified. So everybody is sort of given more of an opportunity to weigh in on what would go in there. Because we had concerns about, once you open that up to being village commercial, what goes in there, how do we access traffic and parking, given that that's a big traffic spot for certain times of the day, and it's that close to, it's in within vision distance of the school, and it gives us additional zoning oversight to be able to look at how that comes to play. So I agreed with that, and made sense to me when we talked about it before, so.
So are you saying that you would rather have it be controlled by the planning board through a regulatory process, or you'd rather have it go to the zoning board of adjustment and let them make a decision before it gets passed over to us? Was that part of what you were saying?
Well, if it's village commercial, we would still have comment on a site plan. I guess there's just a sort of an understood that it would end up being a business.
I'm just curious about your mention of the ZBA.
Before anything goes in there anyway, wouldn't you have oversight over it to a certain extent?
Right, but it's just
So why
not
make that
commercial.
extra step will make it difficult for that landowner or the property owner. But you just add another step in there.
I think it needs more review because of where it is. Because of that, the location, the parking, the traffic, that's a challenging site.
The village the village commercial district is not as broad as the general commercial district. It's on a much smaller scale. Anything with 3 or more units, if they decided to remain residential, 3 or more units require a site plan. And any type of business use, because they would be going from residential to a business use, would require a site plan, even if it was a small business. Other than a home occupation, that wouldn't require one. So, based on the fact that there is that much traffic there, it seems like it's a better use versus having another family living there with all of that traffic. The traffic at that school during AM and drop off AM, pickup PM is unbelievable. And the backup going all the way
All
up.
right, but, now you're gonna get certain people, I don't know who,
I'm just
going
saying what
about,
it's
that's the
like
way it
over
is. Nobody wants to ride a bus anymore. Everybody's dropping off and picking up.
I was thinking the
So
same thing.
That's, Mountain View has got the same issue. They've all got the same issues.
But it's
So-
sort of out of the schools and the town's control.
Well, that's
So
what the
I'm just
school always
saying
says.
that.
We went through this for years with the high school with the traffic, where the school said, not our problem at the intersection, it's off school grounds. So,
There's 50, according to the traffic studies that were done by Southern New Hampshire Planning, there's 51 cars traveling on Elm Street each day, on that section of Elm Street.
51?
I'm sorry, 5,100.
Oh, that's a better.
I was gonna say 51, that's a
51,
country
let's
road.
approve it.
yeah, jeez.
I got more on mine.
Yeah, really. Well, I mean, I guess in connection with a site plan, or any business is gonna have to consider that, because access to the site during those hours is gonna be pretty limited. Tim?
So I think that if, from a proposal of control, that the planning board, if it was changed to village commercial, the planning board would be directly responsible for review of any proposed improvements to the site. If you leave it like it is and it goes to the zoning board of adjustment first, and they grant the approval, now we have to work with the approval granted by the ZBA, and it makes our job more difficult, I believe, in some cases.
Good point.
Yeah, I could always grant variances to everything, and will, so.
Well,
Sure.
so-
Zoning eliminates that risk, with all due respect to Gail, but
So that was my
it's gonna
point.
be a tight lot in any event, so.
No. The other argument is that this lot got subdivided, choices got made in the subdivision, and it is what it is, so, that's what you got. I don't know that I don't think the village commercial is a huge change. I think it provides an incentive for somebody to invest in the property, which is what we're really talking about here, and the fact that they might be able to operate a business out of there. But any business operation would need to come here, as Joanne pointed out, unless it's an occupation. I'm not. Once again, we're presented with something for which there was a subdivision decision made, and, you know, to the extent the applicant makes the argument that it made no sense to turn that whole lot into village commercial at the time, I think that's an accurate argument. Or create a split lot as they presented it. I don't think it needed to be split. I think you could have made the whole thing village commercial, and then you could have just had one thing on that, but choices were made to keep it residential for that piece and get the advantage of that, and now we have another piece. So I think it's up to the board as to how they think the development of that lot going forward would work best for the town. So, there is a request to change the zoning on this lot to village commercial. Is there a motion to put amendment number, do you have a further question,
It
David?
has to go
Our,
about.
our motion is to recommend a position.
Right,
that
to
we're in favor.
recommend, well, to recommend
it
or
is
to
going.
not recommend,
Okay.
right.
Yes, to recommend.
Goes on the ballot and then.
Right, it's on the ballot regardless. And it will be number 4, given what the board has voted on so far tonight. So does a board member have a motion on amendment number 4? Tim?
I'll make a motion to recommend amendment number 4 be put on the ballot.
I'll second it.
So you're recommending that it go on the ballot to be approved?
Yes.
Okay.
It would say recommended by the planning board.
Is there any further discussion?
Last time this came up, last year, I guess, the concerns were, one is, you know, sort of creeping loss of residential character. And 2, because of the busy intersection in the school, there is some buffer value in having a residential property. I'm not sure that's changed necessarily. Plus question, you want to promote business use, you could change it. Also try to keep a residential flavor. I don't think that should be. Yeah, it's a close question.
All right, any further discussion? All those in favor, why don't we show hands? Aye.
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 2, 5, opposed? 2. All right, so it goes on recommended 5 to 2. All right, is there any other business to come before the board tonight? No.
If you want to know about EDC last night,
Yeah, well, why don't you
Joanne
tell
and I
us what-
attended,
And I
and
do have
Gail.
to take your photo. I almost forgot.
Oh, okay.
Charlie Tentis tendered his resignation as chairman of the EDC last night. He's been a great chairman. He's going to be missed. We have a pro tem for 2 months until the election, not the election, until an appointment runs out, or for the vice chair at the time, Andrew Cataret. So at that time, we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do from there. 'Cause he's not going to seek another term, from what I understand. Is that correct, Joanne?
Yeah.
And Joanne,
Thank you,
could you?
Nancy.
Could you briefly just tell the board about the contract we entered into with the Hillsborough County?
So last month, the board, it was approved by the selectmen, they entered into a contract with UNH Cooperative Extension. And the goal is to start getting some conversations going in Pinardville with the business owners. So that we're going to hold some roundtable discussions at first, but the end result would be to encourage the business owners to form a business group similar to Main Street, where they could connect with each other and maybe do some events together and try to make a little bit more of a cohesive group down there, because here they have, contact with one another, but it doesn't seem to be that way in Pinardville, so we're trying to
Promote
hopefully
that.
encourage that and help them get to a point where they don't feel like they're neglected. So we're working with UNH Cooperative to.
And they have a
build some
specialist
events
that
and-
deals with that stuff, right?
Yes. They have lots of different programs that they offer. This one, they sort of geared it towards what we were looking for, so it's not a specific program that is in their booklets, but they're very willing to work as far as what you're looking for and how can they address the needs of specific town problems.
Okay.
So that will be ongoing for the next year,
All right. Any-
2020.
Any other business before the board? Our next meeting is when, Joanne?
January 23rd.
All right, Tim.
Joanne, have we heard back from the East Point Rentals yet on their proposed landscaping plan or anything on that? Should we be expecting something and prompt them or leave them alone?
You had asked them to provide some information, but I believe, I'd have to check the minutes, but I believe it was sometime in the spring, once they went.
But they are supposed to come back with an actual plan for the restoration of the vegetation on the fence
And I
line.
think we were waiting for after the winter time to do that.
Well, that's okay, but they're gonna do this work in the spring, but I thought they might be back with their plans sooner.
No, I haven't heard anything from them.
Thank you.
Okay,
Budget Committee public hearing next Tuesday.
at the high school.
Yep.
7 o'clock, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, Happy New Year, everybody, and we are adjourned. All right, so Joanne is gonna take